Okay, so I want to do a quick side video here. So I just did a review. The last one I posted was the Hornby Railroad. Let me go and put the little shell on here. It was the Hornby Railroad TTS model, the Class 40, and I had wanted to kind of show what the difference is between shelling out some cash for the, say, like the railway line versus a railroad line, and whether or not it's worth it, and sort of the difference between the two. If you've been running old DCC trains, or maybe you've picked up most of your stuff used, and you're looking to kind of step it up a little bit, which, trust me, once the bug bites you, that's typically the case. What the difference is between, say, Hornby Railroad and a Hornby Railway. So most manufacturers these days sort of split their lines up. So, like, for example, Thurn's got their ready to roll, and then they've got their what do they call it, Genesis. Walther's has got, they bought out Lifelike's Proto 2000, or actually I think they just completely bought out Lifelike, but Walther's has their Proto 2000, and I forget it's something similar. It might actually be called Railroad too, which is their sort of basic line, and I think they have 3 tiers. And then there's another company that has like Rivet Counter, which is their mid grade, and then they've got their Museum Quality, which is their higher grade, so on and so forth. You get the point. And if you are new to that kind of a buying process, you might look at, say, 2 locomotives and go, well, they kind of look the same. Why shell out for that extra? And as you start to progress in your modeling, the difference is pretty great. To me, it's a difference between enjoying a train for a short period of time and then passing stuff down to your kids, because some of these models are built so well they'll far outlast you. Unless you have one train that you run for hours and hours a day. So, in this video, we're sort of comparing apples and oranges here. This is a Hornby Railroad, and this is slightly older Bachmann Branchline. This is 2014. I think this was built around 2010, so not too far apart. And I want to show you kind of the guts. A quick look at the outside. This. Try not to break that here. This railroad model looks pretty good, and part of that, go on camera, just unlock and lock here. Part of that has to do with the fact that this was weathered, and I didn't weather this. It was pre-weathered, not by Hornby, but I think a hobby shop maybe had some of these weathered and kind of sent back in, and they resold them at a slightly higher cost. But when you have the cheaper models, it really pays off to sort of weather them a bit, because when you get them in pristine condition, sort of the lower, I don't want to say quality, but the lack of details shows a lot more in the pristine versus when you when you weather them. So if you get sort of the cheaper models or cheaper rolling stock, it is worth weathering them, because then you start to get to a point where you can't really tell them apart. Come on, camera. Sorry, let me lock that so you don't end up throwing up on your phone there. So yeah, so let's take a look at the railroad. It's not bad, they're basically the same on each side. I call these broomsticks because the British trains, they look kind of like a broomstick. So and then we'll take a look at the more expensive ones. Let me start taking out some of the screws out of this branch line model here. And I modeled both HO and double O, and it's funny because I started doing this. I used to be really into trains when I was a kid, and my wife and I like to go antique shopping, and I came across a model train at a thrift store. Let's look in the light here, and I picked that up, and it was all over. I mean, I ended up starting doing research. I started on DC and kind of bought used trains because I thought, why would you want DCC? It's just trying to take a solid technology and make it more complicated. And the reality is, especially if you don't have a lot of space, DCC can really give you just so much more, not necessarily in sound. I thought really that was it. Like, oh, you got sound. Like, I can live without that. But it's just simple things like, for example, if you're running DCC, in order to get the lights to look right, you got to run the train on, rocket mode. Whereas a DCC, you can let them just sit on your layout and drink your coffee and look at all your trains with the lights on. It's just nice, especially after a long work week. Let's make sure I got these all out. And I've got kind of a fondness for both double O and HO because I grew up as a kid in the United Kingdom. and then I moved over to the States. I was around both of these trains, so my layout's kind of funny in that, it's got a lot of greenery, so I pretend when I'm running the U.S. trains that it's, East Coast because it's so green, and then when I get the British trains on, it actually fits just fine. Everything looks okay. There we go. Get that one out of the way. And for me, I grew up in, I would almost call it the golden age when, British Rail was still nationalized in the 80s. I rode on the HST 125 when they had the intercity swallow liveries, and, British Rail had finally gotten it together, and their trains ran on time, and their sandwiches didn't consist of, sort of a wet ball mess in a package. And then just right when they were getting it together, between Margaret Thatcher and I think it was actually, I don't want to get into political debate here, but I think it was John Major that finally privatized them after this poor Brit spent all that money getting their national rail system going, and then the private companies are like, yeah, we'll take it over now. You know what? It's funny. It's such a weird system over there because, as far as I understand it, they've got like 6 departments or something ridiculous, and the private companies. Sorry, I'm struggling to get this off here. The private companies run like the trains, and then the taxpayers run the line, and then somebody else runs the signage, and it's just it's just a weird thing over there. It's totally inefficient, and I don't live there, but not anymore. But I just feel like the Brits, they pay so much in taxes, and their rail system's a heck of a lot better than ours. But even still feel like they get the short end of the stick. Give me a second here while I pause this so I can come back and act like I know what I'm talking about. 1 second. All right, so I had to go get my handy dandy foam pad. So let me just grab another box here. Got a Bachmann Branchline box. That's how you know you're a train guy. You got a bunch of train boxes everywhere. I'm going to lift this up so you got a better view. One thing I want to mention, if you do end up getting some of the more expensive trains, you'll want to invest in one of these guys. My wife got this for me for, I think it was a birthday, and she got it off of Etsy for like $20, and it's a little custom holder when you're working on trains, and especially the more expensive ones. It really pays to have one of these when you're trying to inspect something, because sometimes you'll swear you can't get the shell off and it's just 1 or 2 more turns. Don't force it. Take your time with these things, and you gotta go answer the phone or something like that. These things will keep your trains protected if you have to walk away for a break or something. Just a quick note on the newer Bachmann branch lines, they tend to have 8 screws, 2, 4, 6, 8. Take those 4 off and the shell comes right off. If you're running one of the old ones, the insanity of getting those off. There are little doors. So, this thing looks they all look kind of like broomsticks. So there's a door here, door here, door here, and door here. And what they used to do is there would be clips that were attached to the windows behind the door. And it was just the stupidest design because they were so easy to break if you weren't careful. So you take something like this, it's just some plastic, cut 4 strips out, you just push them between the body and the shell on each spot, and it would finally pop off. That's the best way to do it. So just a little kind of side tip there. So let's go ahead and take off the broomstick here. We'll take a look at this. Okay, so this is a more expensive model. So if I had to guess, this is a non-sound, though it is sound ready. It's got the little spot for the speaker there. This probably brand new would run you, if I had to guess, in US dollar, about 250 to 300 US versus something like the Hornby Railroad. And again, I know this is apples and oranges. I'm not trying to put Hornby against Bachmann here. I'm trying to show just the difference between the premium lines and the non. I don't have another class that's similar. But in any case, sort of what the difference is. And on the railroads, it's all about cutting costs. They say that the railroads are more durable, maybe for a younger age, but really they're cutting costs everywhere they can, and you'll really find that out when you run these. They have these weird ring-filled motors that are a lot better than the old ones, but they don't tend to run smoothly. Something like the more premium lines, like the Hornby Railways, will have what's the word? The word's escaping me now. Oh, a flywheel. So you've got the motor here, and then you've got like a drive shaft, and then you've got this heavy flywheel on each side. Typically both sides are driven rather than just one side. And what will happen is the motor will go first, the drive shaft starts to spin, and then the flywheel catches up, and they're quite heavy. And as those start to spin, with the gear ratio, you just get this real smooth movement. And then when you stop the train, rather than it just kind of jerk and stop, it'll come to a nice smooth stop, which is much more prototypical. And to be honest with you, it's just more enjoyable to watch. The weight on this, this does not need any more weight. It's extremely heavy. In fact, I would wager to guess is about 500 grams. And the Branchline, excuse me, the Railroad, you're lucky if that thing weighs 150 grams out of the box. So these are real heavy. They pretty much pull an apartment building with enough power. So the quality is just much, much better. It's much cleaner. You got this big old chipboard here. Here I've got a TCS sound decoder, and I used to have problems with scale trains, and so I got the option to add a what do they call it? No kill, don't die. Basically, it's a little, like a little, not a chip. Bear with me here. Not a transistor, capacitor. Capacitor that'll sort of hold power so that when you go over a dead spot on your track, it'll sort of keep the loco going for about 4 or 5 seconds, and you never have to worry about flickering lights or sound resetting. Now, if you watch any of my other videos, let me give you a tip if you're just getting into scaling in the US. These trains, if you're not running back EMF decoders, will run like crap. And this is something I've discovered. I used to put NCE decoders in my 00 scale trains, and you can set the low torque and the high torque and the mid-range, and bust out a calculator, start doing graphs, and figure out, you end up messing with CVs for like, an hour or two, and it's absolutely it's not an enjoyable process. It makes the hobby become a job, and you really don't want that. And so what'll happen is, in order to get these suckers to go, if you pick one up, you're going to pick up your first 00 from, something like a train show or something like that. Put it on the track. You're used to your Therns, your Proto 2000s running nice and smooth. You get this thing, you got to turn up to like a speed step 40 to get the thing to move, and you're like, that sucks. It's real disappointing, and there's nothing worse than being excited about taking a train home only for it to run horribly, and you just convinced your wife how great it is, and now it goes on the track, and you don't want to show your disappointment because you had to justify spending more money on trains again, and don't get rid of the train, or do, because then I can buy it from you on eBay. But what you're looking for is a decoder that has back EMF. So TCS has those. The Bachmann decoders, although their sound's not great, they have back EMF built in. And what will happen is you can literally take a 00 scale train with an NC decoder out, pop it out, put a back EMF decoder in there, and it will run smooth as butter. We're talking like speed step 2 or 3. I mean, it is literally like night and day. So if you ever have problems with your 00 scale, change them out for a more expensive decoder. It's really worth it. And with the TCS decoders, if you screw something up in the first year, they'll replace them for free, which is pretty nice. I think up to 1 time or something. Just in case an NCE guy watches this, or somebody from the company, I love NCE. All my DCC stuff is NCE, so I have no beef with them. I just don't like their decoders on 00 scale locos. They just don't work well. So anyway, getting back into it. So so a couple other things to note is when you buy the more expensive lines, you will typically, if you run your trains often, you're going to need to maintenance them yourself. And if you don't already have it, go onto Amazon, buy yourself type in plastic openers. You get these little bags full of random little tools. It's like $8. And these will help you take your train apart. Don't be using pliers or a flathead screwdriver. Go get yourself some proper tools that are not going to damage your locos. And you're going to need to maintenance them, and that includes oiling them. Now, on the cheap ones, I'm not a plastic expert. There's a guy on YouTube from Canada that's always taking stuff apart, and he knows all the different kinds of plastics. Let me just kind of zoom right here. And the plastics on the rail ones, you just have to hold it to know that it's cheap. And the way that you take these off is, if you can kind of see right there, there's a little clip here, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and they are so delicate. And the problem is finding parts for these is often next to impossible once you break something. If you ever need to take this apart, this one is driven only on one side, so we'll Take a look here. There's a motor on this side and just some gears on the other side. Typically the other side doesn't need to be oiled. Just do the side that has the motor. And what I'll do is I'll come through from the top and I'll put one pair of tweezers in one side, one pair of tweezers in the other, wiggle this just ever so slightly, and it'll pop off, and that's the best way to do it. But on the more expensive ones, like I said, I'm not a plastic expert, but there's something different about it. The plastic is much more durable. In this case, it's actually metal. And so when you need to take these off to oil it, you're just not, I mean, obviously you still need to be careful, but you can pop it right off with confidence. Obviously, take a look at the, the crack lines, the clips, and do what you need to do, but you can pop it right off, oil it, put it back on. You can do that, once a year for the next 10, 20 years. As long as you're careful, it's going to last. The cheaper lines, not so much. And I'm telling you that from experience. So I've got some trains that are 20, 30 years old, and I'm still maintaining them, and they're just fine. So other things are, if you look, for example, on the railroad model, it has, and I can't stand these things, it has these, is this the side here? Hopefully you can see that on camera. They've got these little rubber tires. So if you look right there, there's a rubber tire, and there's another one right here. I will typically change these out for clear tires. Why do they do that? Well, they're trying to save money everywhere. When you buy these, before you add on some Harbor Freight weights, they are extremely light. And so what happens is they can't pull, they can barely pull themselves, let alone a full rake. And so what happens is they put the rubber tires on there to save money, give it a little bit more traction, and then you end up getting this black rubber stuff all over your track. And if you're running DCC, don't think that if you're going from DC to DCC, all of a sudden your power issues are going to be solved. In fact, oftentimes it actually gets worse. But you don't want that stuff on your track. Why on earth they're still doing that, I don't know. Just stick some ballast in there and get rid of the rubber tires. But anyway, on the more expensive ones, it's very rare to see rubber tires. Another thing is that if you look real close on the wheels, one, the pickups are significantly better. Look at those beautiful brass pickups. And did you see this little guy in here? That is, in fact, you know what? That needs to be repaired. Is that a mess up from last time? Oh, no, it's not. I'm sorry. So when these turn, the pickups are picking up this little part right here, and it causes them to run much smoother. Oftentimes you got bearings between the casing and the wheels that they're just not going to put onto the lower end models, where basically what they do is they'll take the wheel, there's kind of a groove here, and they just drop the wheel in. I mean, it's just a wheel sitting on plastic, and I suppose over 20-30 years it'll probably just burned itself all the way through. These will almost always have some kind of bushing or sort of a metal plate where the wheels clip into, and that sits between this and the wheels, which gives you much smoother performance. You can tell I'm not a mechanic, I'm a computer guy, so don't know all of the right terminology here. Other things, small details, not always something you have to be picky about here. You got this metal wiring. You'll tend to see much more metal on the more expensive ones. A big one is that this has LEDs built in. And so, notice all these little spots, these little pickups right here. On the bottom, they actually slide into that little, I won't call it motherboard, but little chip board, little PCB board in there. And there are LEDs in the front, on each side, and they, depending on the direction of the train, for at least for 00 scale, they'll be red when they're on the back, and on this one it's yellow on the front. And then it'll switch. And then this one even has cab lights in it. So when the little drivers, these little guys, Bob and Bob over here, are riding, the cab lights up a nice warm yellow color. The railroad one, and this was a real disappointment when I bought it, has no lights at all. No LEDs, not even any halogen bulbs. It's just, here's your speaker, and enjoy it. In fact, I was saying in the other video that rather than trying to tape these things down, they just, in Shenzhen, China, they just use a little bit of tar or gum or, ghetto blue tack and put that on there to keep the wires down. And the workmanship is it's pretty shoddy. It works, but when you get these, my fear is that I got lucky. This one runs great, but I have seen, there's a guy that has a YouTube channel I highly recommend called Kampala Station. He used to live in South Africa, I think, and he's moving to Australia. He knows far more than I do. But I used to love watching his channel. I learned a lot from it. And, you know, that poor guy would buy a train, and every single time it would just have nothing but problems. And because he's in South Africa, you know, I think that's where he was. Getting replacement parts was even worse than living in the U.S. So, you know, you really want to see something like this, just clean, beautiful, a little extra time put into it. I guess on a video like this, I really should, you know, completely take it apart. You know what? Why not? We're already 20 minutes in, right? If you've gone this far, you probably got nothing else to do today. Or you're a web developer. And you're just throwing me up on another one of your screens. Oops. We're committed, I guess. Actually, you know what? I may as well just oil this after this video. So I'm going to pause this while I take this apart. Actually, you know what? Not found an easier way. I'm going to go ahead and take the trucks out. In the UK, they call these bogies, I believe. They call them trucks, which is weird because I think bogey is another word for booger in the UK. So why do they call them bogies? I don't know. That's our ancestors over there, right? So we're going to take these out. All right, come on. There we go. All right, so this was the drive shaft that I was telling you about. Now, you won't typically see this on the cheaper lines. So you can see here, you know, I got a lot of gear ratio going. It's a lot of clockwork, but basically these little drive shafts will plug into oftentimes a, what's the word? Said it earlier, not a counterweight. I'm just getting tired. I'm burning the midnight oil here. Come on, guys, somebody yell at the screen. What do they call it? Whatever. Go rewind the video. My brain's getting a little tired. But anyway, they will connect into that. Because that spins after the motor goes up, it just creates a really smooth movement. And you know, the downside is you got to take these apart maybe once a year, depending on how much you run them, and add a little bit of grease here. Get label grease. So, for example, I use this. It doesn't run. It almost comes out like a jelly. And you'll add it here and here. This stuff is awesome. It's absolutely worth the money. And then, you know, for some of the other parts, I'll use like a Label 102, and this stuff it's great. And the other thing is it doesn't conduct electricity. So if you get a little bit somewhere where it's not supposed to, you don't have to worry about it shorting stuff out. I mean, obviously, if you get enough dirt in here, it'll still be a problem. But so yeah. Now, what I wanted to show you is there. See that copper bearing there? Oh, for goodness sake. Let me look at the manual so I don't sound like an idiot. Flywheel. That's what it was called. So the worm gear attaches to the flywheel. I think that's what happens when a computer guy tries to act like he knows what he's talking about. And so what happens is this piece of copper right here, the motor gets going first. Then this kind of starts to spin. It almost catches and starts to spin. Then spins the worm gear. Then works its way through the gear chain. And then what ends up happening is a very smooth movement. So if you ever watch those reviewers that do those, you know, 1-speed step, 2-speed step, it's just got such beautiful smoothness. Or if sometimes you just look at somebody who has a nice layout and their trains just look so smooth when they run, versus somebody who runs at like 90 miles an hour, like the Lionel guys. What's up with the Lionel guys running their trains at like max speed? It just results in just beautiful slow speed. Unlike the RC car guys, the name of the game with expensive trains is how slow can it go. So if you're an RC guy, you want to get the fastest RC car, right? If you're a Lionel, I think they have 2 speeds, 0 and like 150. But for the, you know, for other modelers, these more expensive ones, you want them to run nice and smooth, with just a lot of torque behind them. And the more expensive models will accomplish that with the extra, you know, the flywheel and the you know, the spinny thing. All right, it's 12:30 at night, and it's totally worth it. So, so yeah, so that's kind of the difference. The build quality is just much better. You can just tell they've taken some extra time, and I think that's kind of the gist of it. You'll find that the decoder is a little bit better. If you have a sound model, then the sound is much smoother. So, for example, in the Hornby Railroad, There's sound in there. It's, sounds decent, but there's not necessarily smooth transitions when you go from one speed to another, versus if you have like a wow sound or an upgraded sound decoder, you just get that beautiful sound that if you had your eyes closed, you almost wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a model train and a video. If you're running a Hornby TTS, you'll know. You can hear it cut out. It doesn't mix very well. So for example, if you run the compressor at the same time as the brakes, then the brakes will go first. You'll turn off the brakes. It mutes for about half a second and the compressor kicks back in. It's just not particularly realistic. But for the price, and especially if you're younger, just starting out, they're awesome. It's a great gateway to the addiction that we all find ourselves in. So what was I going to say? I wanted to make a couple other comments about the decoder. I can't remember what it was now, about these no-kill decoders. So this is a TCS no-kill decoder. You can spend a little bit of extra, and I will if I get a good sale on these, because if you have a loco that's just particularly troublesome, especially if it tends to want to stop on points, then you have the option, if you want, to plug in a capacitor without having to solder anything, and you put that in there. You get about 5-6 seconds of power, and it'll run smooth as butter over dead points, dirty points, and no flickering lights or sound cutting in and out. But I got lucky. Once I switched out my NC decoder for the TCS, I didn't need it. It ran like it was brand new. So one more thing, does this have pushable buffers? So this is obviously with British trains, but on the more expensive models, these buffers will actually move in and out. On the on this, go figure, on this model it doesn't. On the less expensive models, that's typically not the case. They won't move. I could care less personally. I mean, I'm sure maybe there's a reason for it, but I don't know. Doesn't bother me. Another thing is the expensive models almost always come with extra parts. So if you look at the front of this, what's not typical, you see some holes here, is that the little brake lines aren't hanging off of this. Now the untrained eye wouldn't notice. This looks good enough, right? But for the more prototypical guys, they will normally come with a little bag of spare parts, and I've seen guys put them on. And if you have the spare parts and you know what you're doing, put them on, because it looks great. And you tend not to get those with the railroad models, or your rivet counter models. Stuff like that. So cool. I'm getting tired. It's 27 minutes. I've somehow managed to talk for half an hour, and if you've made it through this far, thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions below. I have enough trains that if I don't know the answer, I'll look it up and find one and take it apart and help you out. I have bought a mix of new trains and old trains, DC and DCC. I've got in the worst deals and the best deals, and so I've probably experienced a lot of the troubles that you're going through, and I'll do my best to help you, since I know, especially when it comes to 00 scale in the US, it's really hard to find answers when you're stuck, and I hate to see people just give up and throw these up on the bay. It's, if you can get them going, a little bit of extra time, a little bit of help, it's such a joy to run these guys. So I'm gonna go ahead and put these all back together now. Go listen to a podcast, see who's going to win the election. What a disaster dumpster fire this year has been. But COVID or no COVID, we get to play with our trains. Thankfully, they don't spread the disease and have to wear masks, so we can enjoy this during the shutdown. So have a wonderful day or evening, depending where you're at. Now we'll speak with you soon.